Welcome back to the deep dive. We are doing something a little different today.
Very different.
Yeah, usually we are tearing apart tech trends or looking at the future of the economy or trying to figure out if AI is going to take our jobs next week.
Which is always a fun time.
Right. But today we are looking at, well, arguably the oldest industry in human history.
The industry of meaning.
Exactly. We were talking about spirituality. And before you check to make sure you didn't accidentally click on a guided meditation feed or a lecture about the healing power of expensive crystals, just stick with me.
Because there is actual hard data here.
There is. Because the reason we are doing this is that I looked at the massive stack of research we pulled together for this, and we are talking everything from psychological meta-analyses to massive syntheses from the various AI models we ran this through. And I realized something pretty profound.
It completely shifts the paradigm.
It really does. This isn't about incense. It isn't about sitting cross-legged on a mountaintop. The data suggests that spirituality is actually just a form of technology.
That is the absolute perfect way to frame it, because if you strip away all the aesthetics,
The robes and the chanting.
right, the robes and the specific cultural artifacts, if you take all that away, what you are left with is a set of protocols. It is essentially a user manual for the human nervous system.
Which we desperately need.
Oh, we do. Frankly, looking at the mental health data we usually cover, most of us are operating without that manual entirely. We are just button mashing our way through life, hoping for the best.
We are absolutely button mashing. I mean, I feel like I am playing a video game where I don't know the controls and I am just hitting the X button repeatedly hoping I don't die.
I think everyone feels that way on some level,
Right.
and that is exactly the mission for this deep dive. We have taken this huge stack of guides, ancient texts, modern psychological reports, medical data from places like Harvard and Oxford, and the synthesis from our AI research, and we are trying to distill the absolute best practices.
So we are stripping the dogma and keeping the data.
Precisely. We are not interested in the theology today. We are completely agnostic about the who or the what. We just want the mechanics. What actually works to lower cortisol, increase focus, and generate that elusive thing called peace.
That is the goal. But I think the first thing the source material clarifies is the definition itself. Because spirituality is an incredibly loaded word.
It carries a lot of baggage.
It really does. For half of you listening right now, that word probably triggers a warm, fuzzy feeling. But for the other half, it triggers a massive skeptic allergic reaction.
You hear spirituality and you instantly think of someone trying to sell you a course on how to vibrate at a higher frequency.
Yes, exactly. I am usually in that second camp. It feels vague to me. It feels unscientific. But the sources seem to draw a pretty distinct line, or at least a very broad circle, around what this actually means in a practical context.
They do. The consensus across all the material we reviewed is that spirituality is fundamentally distinct from religion.
Which is a huge distinction to make right up front.
It is the foundation of everything we are going to talk about. Religion is an institution. It has rules, hierarchies, dogma, and usually a specific deity or set of deities. Spirituality in the context of well-being and psychological health is defined much more broadly. It is simply a connection to something greater.
And that something greater is the variable, right? It doesn't have to be supernatural at all.
Not at all. It certainly can be a deity if that is your path, but the sources are very clear that it can just as easily be nature, it can be the human collective, just that sense that we are all in this together.
Or a set of ethical values.
Right. Values that you hold above your own immediate desires, or can simply be a connection to a deeper, more stable version of yourself. The definition isn't about what you connect to, it is about the act of connection itself.
It is about anchoring yourself in something that isn't just your immediate anxiety loop or your overflowing to-do list.
Exactly. And that is such a useful distinction because it makes it accessible. It means you don't have to sign up for an entire belief system to get the physiological and psychological benefits.
So we have a roadmap for this conversation today. We are going to break this down into three main buckets based on the research. First, we have got the inner work, the mental game, the mindfulness
A
stuff.
foundational code.
Right. Then we have got the outer work, how the body and the physical environment fit into all this. And then my personal favorite, the daily grind. How do you actually integrate this when you have a mortgage, a tight deadline, and a leaky faucet?
Integration is where almost everyone fails, so we will definitely spend a lot of time there. It is easy to be spiritual at a fancy silent retreat. It is really hard to be spiritual in rush hour traffic.
Let's get right into it then. I don't think it is a spoiler to say that the number one practice cited across every single source we looked at is mindfulness and meditation.
It is the heavy hitter. It is the absolute non-negotiable.
You really cannot have a conversation about spiritual technology without talking about attention management.
Because that is really what meditation is. It isn't about zoning out. It is about tuning in.
But here is where the data gets super interesting and where it totally contradicts pop culture.
Yeah.
We have this idea that to really meditate, you need to go away for 10 days, shave your head, and sit in total silence until your legs fall asleep.
Or you need to wake up at 4 in the morning like one of those tech CEOs on LinkedIn who claims they meditate for 3 hours before jumping in an ice bath.
Right. It becomes this performative endurance sport.
It is intimidating.
It is. But the source summaries we ran emphasize the exact opposite. They highlight a very low barrier to entry. The data shows that starting with just 5 to 10 minutes a day is sufficient to trigger actual neuroplastic changes in the brain.
5 minutes. Okay, I can do 5 minutes. I routinely waste 5 minutes just deciding which pair of socks to wear.
We all do.
But let's talk about the actual mechanism here, because I have tried this. I sit there for 5 minutes, and for 4 minutes and 50 seconds of that time, I am thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch, or that email I forgot to send, or why that random pop song from 1999 is stuck in my head.
Which feels like failure to most people. It completely feels like failure. Am I doing it wrong?
You are actually doing it perfectly. That is the biggest misconception the sources highlight. People think meditation is about clearing the mind or stopping your thoughts.
That is what I always thought.
It isn't possible. The brain secretes thoughts just like the salivary glands secrete saliva. It cannot stop it. The actual practice is noticing the distraction.
Okay, so noticing is the work.
Yes. Every single time you catch yourself thinking about lunch and you actively bring your attention back to your breath, that is 1 rep. It is literally a bicep curl for your prefrontal cortex.
So the distraction is necessary. I actually need to get distracted so I can practice coming back.
The distraction is the weight you are lifting. If you didn't get distracted, you wouldn't be training the muscle of focus at all. If you just sat there in perfect bliss for 5 minutes, you actually haven't done much work. The work is the return.
That completely flips the script for me. So what are the specific techniques the sources recommend?
Breath awareness is the standard one, just anchoring your attention to the inhale and the exhale. It is the perfect portable anchor because you always have your breath with you. But the data also heavily mentions metta, which is loving-kindness meditation.
I've always found that one a bit soft, honestly.
Yeah.
Wishing people well. It feels like a greeting card. May you be happy. May you be healthy. It feels a little forced to me.
It definitely sounds soft on the surface, but the neurobiology behind it is incredibly hard. The research we pulled references medical school data showing that when you practice metta, you are actually down-regulating your amygdala.
And the amygdala is the threat detection center of the brain, right?
Exactly. It is the part of you that is always scanning for danger. By actively generating goodwill toward yourself and others, you are literally training your brain to be less hostile and less defensive.
So it is not just about being a nice person. It is about lowering your own biological threat response.
It is entirely physiological. The data links this directly to much better emotional regulation. You are essentially creating a gap.
A gap.
Yes. This is a concept that came up a lot in the psychological literature we analyzed. Between any stimulus and your response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. Meditation physically widens that gap.
Man, that gap is everything. That gap is the difference between screaming at the guy who just cut you off in traffic and just taking a breath and letting it go.
It is the difference between sending that angry Slack message at work and waiting 5 minutes to rewrite it calmly.
Exactly. Without the practice, there is no gap at all. Stimulus leads immediately to reaction. You are basically just a robot programmed by your triggers.
And the inner work is all about de-automating those reactions. It gives you the agency to pause and say, I am feeling intense anger right now, but I do not have to act out of anger.
Speaking of de-automating and figuring out what is actually going on in our heads, let's talk about the spiritual audit. This came up in the section on journaling.
Yes, journaling is a massive part of this toolkit.
Now again, journaling can feel a bit like a teenage diary entry. Dear diary, today was really hard and I have a crush on someone. But the sources suggest a much more rigorous approach to it.
They do. The insights from the AI synthesizers emphasize that spiritual journaling is really a data collection tool. It is not just venting onto a page, it is debugging.
Debugging. I love that analogy. We are back to the tech theme.
Think about your mind as an operating system. You have all these background processes running that you aren't even aware of. Deep fears, resentments, subconscious scripts, old narratives from your childhood.
And you can't fix them if you can't see them.
Exactly. They are just eating up your RAM and slowing down your entire processor. The sources suggest using specific targeted prompts to drag these background processes into the light.
Like what kind of prompts?
Questions like, who am I beyond my job title? Or what specific situation triggered my anger today and why did it hit me so hard?
It forces you to actually articulate the vague feeling. Because usually we just walk around feeling bad or off, but we don't know why.
And that articulation is the key to the whole thing. There is a psychological concept called effect labeling. When you put a negative emotion into concrete words, you actually diminish its activity in the brain.
So naming it tames it.
Yes. If you just feel bad, it consumes you. It is like a fog you are walking through. But if you write down, I feel anxious today because I am worried about that big presentation and I feel inadequate, suddenly the anxiety becomes an object.
It becomes something you can look at rather than the lens you were looking through.
That is a brilliant way to put it. You are externalizing the bug so you can patch the code. You are taking the subjective feeling of I am sad and turning it into an objective observation. There is sadness happening right now.
That tiny linguistic shift seems like a massive spiritual leap.
It is the absolute beginning of developing the observer self. You start to realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the consciousness that is witnessing the thoughts.
Okay, so we are meditating to widen that gap, and we are journaling to debug the internal code. That covers the internal work. But obviously, we aren't just brains floating in jars. We have physical bodies, and we live in a physical world. Which brings us to segment 2, the physicality of spirit.
This is where the traditional Western view of the world really falls apart. We tend to think the mind is the driver and the body is just the car taking the mind to meetings. We think spirituality is this floaty, purely intellectual thing.
But the source material, especially the synthesis on Eastern traditions and somatic psychology, says the complete opposite. It says the body is the antenna.
You simply cannot bypass the physical to get to the spiritual. It doesn't work.
And one of the absolute strongest signals comes from nature. The sources were huge on this. And not just, hey, go outside because it is a nice day, but go outside because it literally changes your brain chemistry.
Right. There is a Japanese concept that was highlighted called Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing. And we should be clear, this isn't just hiking.
Right. It is not power walking to get your 10,000 steps in or close your Apple Watch rings.
It is about complete sensory immersion. It is about engaging all the senses with intention.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Because if I go into the woods, I'm usually just swatting mosquitoes and checking Google Maps to make sure I am not lost.
Well, ideally, you put the phone on airplane mode or leave it in the car. It involves actually smelling the pine trees.
Which does something specific, right?
Yes, trees release airborne chemicals called phytoncides. The sources note that breathing in these phytoncides actually boosts your immune system and significantly lowers stress hormones like cortisol.
It is wild.
It involves actively listening to the wind, feeling the rough texture of the bark, and looking at the patterns around you. The sources talk a lot about the concept of fractals.
Fractals. Those are the repeating geometric patterns found in nature, right? Like the shape of a fern leaf or the way a river branches out.
Yes. And here is the really fascinating part. Our brains have evolved over millions of years to find those fractal patterns inherently soothing. There is a deep cognitive ease that happens when we look at nature that we just do not get when we look at concrete right angles and screens.
Our urban environments are basically cognitively taxing us all day long.
Exactly. Urban environments deplete us. Nature is cognitively restorative. But beyond just the brain chemistry, there is also the profound feeling of awe.
Awe. I feel like awe is such an underrated metric for human life. We track our happiness, we track our productivity, we obsessively track our sleep, but we almost rarely track awe.
And we are starving for it.
We really are. I know that feeling, though,
Mhm.
is when you see something so massive and beautiful, you literally kind of forget to breathe for a second.
The scientific studies we reviewed highlight that awe creates what they call a small self effect. When you stand in front of the ocean or you look up at a massive redwood tree or even just stare at the stars on a really clear night, your ego naturally shrinks.
And when the ego shrinks, the problems that are attached to that ego shrink right along with it.
Exactly. That impending deadline you have next Tuesday feels incredibly significant when you are sitting in your office. It feels like absolute life or death. But standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, it suddenly feels very insignificant.
That perspective shift is a spiritual experience in itself.
It completely reconnects you to scale. It reminds you that you are just a small part of a much larger system. It takes the weight of the world off your shoulders because you finally realize you aren't the one holding up the world.
So if you are someone who simply cannot meditate because your brain is just too loud, maybe the best first step is to just go stare at a really big tree.
It is a completely valid entry point. For many people, the body has to lead and the mind will follow. If you change your physical environment, you change your mind. If you are stuck in a mental anxiety loop, get physically out of the box you are sitting in.
Let's stick with the body for a minute. The sources didn't just talk about where the body is in space, but also how it moves. Yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong. These get lumped into the general exercise category a lot in the West. Like, oh, I will go to a yoga class to get flexible. But they are distinct from just doing burpees at the gym, aren't they?
Very distinct. The analyses we looked at heavily highlight the mind-body connection here. You don't do Tai Chi to burn calories or build muscle. You do it to synchronize.
Synchronize what exactly?
The goal is to perfectly match your physical movement with your breath and your mental attention.
It is basically meditation in motion.
It is embodied cognition. We hold so much emotional trauma and daily stress in our physical tissues. We hold it in tight shoulders, a clenched jaw, a chronically shallow diaphragm. These physical practices are specifically designed to release that stuck energy.
The sources talk about prana or ki, right? Like life force energy.
Oh, yes. And even if you are highly skeptical of those mystical energy concepts, the pure biological reality is undeniable. By doing these movements, you are actively shifting your body from the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight mode, into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest.
You are sending a physical signal to your body that it is safe. And you really can't feel spiritual or open or connected if your body deeply believes it is currently being hunted by a saber-toothed tiger.
Exactly. Maslow's hierarchy of needs applies perfectly here. It is very hard to reach self-actualization or any kind of spiritual transcendence if you are chronically sleep-deprived, fueled entirely by caffeine, and physically tense all the time. You need a solid baseline of biological safety.
The research mentioned detoxing or purifying the body too.
Yeah.
Now, we definitely have to be careful with that word detox because it has become such a terrible marketing buzzword.
Right, it is heavily commodified.
It is not about bussing some $50 juice cleanse from an Instagram influencer. It's about realizing that if you put garbage fuel into the engine, the navigation system, which is your mind, is going to glitch.
The biological machinery absolutely needs to be running smoothly to support the software of the mind. Things like excessive alcohol, heavy processed sugar, chronic lack of sleep, these are depressants and major inflammatory agents.
They create massive brain fog.
And mental clarity is a basic prerequisite for any kind of spiritual insight.
Okay, let's pivot to the next big area. We have looked inward at the mind.
Hmm.
We have looked outward at the body and nature. Now we need to look at other people. Segment 3, connection and service.
This is a crucial pivot.
And I will be totally honest, this is the part where the whole Hermit on the Mountain fantasy completely falls apart for me. I kind of just like the idea of it being just me and the universe figuring things out.
That is what the sources call the community paradox. We have this very romantic Western idea of the solitary seeker finding ultimate truth in isolation. But the sources across the board strongly warn against this. They say community isn't just optional, it is absolutely essential.
But why, though? If the ultimate goal is finding inner peace, why do I need to introduce outer noise? People are annoying. People are honestly the source of 90% of my daily stress.
Because people are mirrors. This is the strong consensus from the psychological analysis we reviewed. You can easily convince yourself you are highly enlightened when you are sitting all alone in your quiet room. You can feel incredibly patient when absolutely no one is interrupting you.
Right. It is easy to be loving when no one is actively disagreeing with your politics.
Exactly. But the real practical test of your spirituality is how you react when someone challenges you or annoys you.
So our daily relationships are basically the stress test for the entire system.
They are the curriculum itself. The sources repeatedly mention the Buddhist concept of the Sangha, which is a community of fellow travelers. It provides emotional support, yes, but it also provides necessary friction.
And friction is where the actual growth happens.
You need other people to point out your blind spots because you literally cannot see them yourself. You need people to hold you accountable to your own stated values.
And we should clarify, this doesn't have to be a traditional church setting, right? Because for a lot of people, that formal structure is a massive barrier.
Not at all. It can be a local meditation group, a philosophy book club, a dedicated online forum, or honestly just a small group of friends who agree to regularly talk about things deeper than sports and the weather, the formal structure matters far less than the core intention. It is simply about breaking out of the echo chamber of your own head.
Which naturally leads us to the other side of connection, which is service. Seva, compassionate action. The sources were pretty heavy on this concept. It seems like you really cannot just be spiritual for your own benefit.
Yeah. Service is a central pillar in almost every single tradition we looked at, from Buddhism to Christian mysticism to secular humanism. It involves a fundamental shift in focus from me to we. And the sources point out something incredibly fascinating here. Altruism is actually self-interested behavior from a purely biological standpoint.
The helper's high. I remember reading about that in the data.
Yes, the research highlights that acts of altruism release massive amounts of endorphins and oxytocin in the brain. It is basically a powerful natural antidepressant.
That makes a lot of sense.
When you are depressed or highly anxious, your mental focus is almost always hyperfixated on the self. You are completely trapped in a mental loop of my pain, my failure, my worry. Helping someone else forces you to exit that painful narrative.
It literally breaks the loop. It forces your gaze outward.
It provides immediate, powerful perspective. It is very hard to endlessly ruminate on your own lack of cosmic purpose when you are actively serving food to someone who is physically hungry, or when you are just sitting and listening to a friend who is actively grieving.
It reconnects you to the broader web of humanity.
It reminds you that you are not the main character of the entire universe. You are just one node in a massive network. And realizing that is actually a profound relief.
It really takes the pressure off. You don't have to carry the whole show on your back.
Mm.
But, and this is a really big nuance, that the sources flagged, compassion isn't just something you project outward toward other people.
No, it isn't. And this is often the hardest part for modern high achievers to grasp: self-compassion. The Buddhist concept of the second arrow explains this dynamic perfectly.
Walk me through the second arrow. I always love a good ancient parable.
So imagine you are walking alone in the woods, and out of nowhere, you get shot by an arrow. That is painful. That is pure physical pain. That is the first arrow. In real life, this represents the inevitable stuff. You make a mistake at work, you lose some money, someone insults you, or you get sick. That hurts.
Right, that is unavoidable pain.
But then immediately after we are hit by the first arrow, we pick up a bow and we shoot ourselves with the second arrow.
Which is our psychological reaction to the pain.
Exactly. The second arrow is the heavy self-judgment. I am such an idiot for getting shot. I always mess this up. I shouldn't be feeling this pain. I should be stronger. Everyone else is so much better at avoiding arrows than me.
We shoot ourselves with the second arrow, and honestly, often a third and a fourth one, just for good measure.
And the tragic part is the second arrow often hurts significantly more than the first one. The first arrow is pain. The second arrow turns that pain into deep suffering. As the saying goes, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Wow.
The sources strongly emphasize that actively forgiving yourself and actively removing that second arrow is a core spiritual practice. You simply cannot pour from an empty cup. If your internal dialogue is constantly abusive, your outward kindness to others will eventually just become performative or deeply resentful. You absolutely have to start with the self.
That hits incredibly close to home. We are so often our own absolute worst critics. Okay, let's move into segment 4, the toolkit. We've got the broad philosophy down, but I really want the specific gear. What are the actual daily tools we need? The first one mentioned is something we hear about constantly, but maybe we are doing it wrong. Gratitude.
Gratitude is very often dismissed as a cheesy cliche or just something you force yourself to do around the Thanksgiving dinner table. But the sources present it as a highly effective tool for hacking your perspective. It is literal cognitive restructuring.
Hacking your perspective. I like that.
The data suggests a very simple daily practice: writing down exactly 3 things you are grateful for every single day.
Just 3 things. That is it.
That is it. But the underlying neurological mechanism is what actually matters here. It shifts the brain from a scarcity mindset, which focuses on what you lack, to an abundance mindset, which focuses on what you already have. It is all about the reticular activating system, or the RAS, in your brain.
The RAS. That is the filter that decides what you consciously notice, right? Like when you decide to buy a red car and then suddenly you see red cars actually everywhere you go.
Exactly. Your brain is constantly bombarded with millions of bits of sensory data every single second. It cannot possibly process all of it, so the RAS filters it based on what it currently thinks is important to your survival. If your RAS is constantly primed to look for problems, insults, and dangers, That is quite literally all you will see. You will experience the entire world as a deeply hostile place.
So if I wake up thinking today is going to completely suck, my RAS is going to actively hunt for every single piece of evidence to prove me right.
Precisely. It will loudly highlight the traffic, the rude
Yeah.
barista, the rain, everything that confirms the bias. But if you intentionally prime it to look for things to be grateful for, even tiny mundane things like a really good cup of coffee, a warm shower, or a sunny window, you physically rewire your brain to automatically scan for the positive.
So you are literally changing the raw data feed that your conscious mind receives.
You are upgrading the filter. And over time, doing that daily completely changes your baseline emotional state. It is not magic, it is just neuroscience. You are simply training your brain to see the good that is already present in your environment.
Okay, tool number 2, sacred space. Now, I live in a regular, moderately sized apartment. I don't have a dedicated temple wing in my house. I barely even have a functional home office.
You definitely do not need a wing. The sources suggest basic environment design. Just set up a small altar or even just dedicate a quiet corner of a room. It can literally be a single shelf. It can be a windowsill.
Then what actually goes on it?
Meaningful objects,
Right.
small candles, photos of your ancestors, a specific rock from a trip you really loved, a visual symbol of your core values. The analysis suggests that the primary psychological function of this space is anchoring.
Anchoring, like a behavioral trigger.
Yes. It relies on context-dependent memory. When you sit in your office chair, your brain immediately primes for work and stress. When you lie down in your bed, it primes for sleep. You need a specific physical space that clearly signals to your nervous system, okay, it is now time to completely disconnect from the chaos.
It creates a hard boundary.
It creates a necessary boundary between the profane, everyday world of endless emails, laundry, and taxes, and the sacred, protected time of internal reflection.
It is essentially just environment design. You design your office for productivity, you design your bedroom for rest, so you should design a small corner specifically for peace.
Precisely. And even just the physical act of lighting a specific candle there can be a powerful cue. The unique smell instantly triggers the desired state of mind.
Tool number 3, studying wisdom. We definitely need to feed the brain something better than endless social media scrolling. The reading list the sources generated was actually pretty eclectic.
It is very broad. The sources mention ancient classics like the Bhagavad Gita and Rumi's poetry, but they also lean heavily on modern psychological works. Two specific names came up repeatedly in the synthesis: Eckhart Tolle and Viktor Frankl.
Tolle wrote The Power of Now, right? That book was absolutely huge a few years ago.
It is definitely a modern classic in this space. His core concept is that almost all human suffering happens because our minds are constantly living in the past, churning over regret and guilt, or projecting into the future, dealing with anxiety and fear.
And the present moment is usually totally fine.
Exactly. Now the immediate raw sensory experience of this exact moment is usually quite manageable. The core spiritual practice is continually pulling your wandering attention back to the immediate present moment.
And the other author, Frankl, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was a psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps. That is an incredibly heavy book to read.
It is incredibly heavy, but it is absolutely essential for understanding the darker side of spirituality, which is how we deal with profound suffering. He forcefully argued that the primary drive in human life isn't pleasure, as Freud thought, but meaning.
Meaning is the driver.
Yes. If you can find actual meaning in your adversity, you can survive almost anything.
But the advice regarding all these books wasn't just to casually read them, right?
No. The expert consensus is that you must practice contemplation. Do not read spiritual texts the way you read a fast-paced thriller or scroll through a news feed. Do not try to speed read them to get to the end. Read one short paragraph and then stop.
Chew on it, as the sources say.
Let it fully digest. Carry that single thought with you all day. Ask yourself, how does this specific sentence apply to my life today? How does it apply to this specific conflict I am having with my coworker?
Because information only becomes wisdom when it is actually applied.
Exactly. Otherwise, it is just intellectual entertainment. You are just proudly collecting interesting facts about spirituality instead of actually being spiritual.
Which leads us perfectly into segment 5 integration, spirituality in the supermarket. Because if all this stuff only works when I am sitting peacefully looking at my candle or reading my profound book, it is not very useful for real life. It is really just a hobby.
That is the ultimate stress test. If your spirituality completely falls apart the second the Wi-Fi goes down, or when your toddler throws a massive tantrum in public, it is not really working. It absolutely has to survive contact with everyday reality.
So how do we actually integrate this? So sources all agree on one major overarching principle: consistency over intensity.
This brings up the brushing your teeth analogy. You would never brush your teeth for 2 hours straight once a month and expect to have healthy teeth. You brush for just 2 minutes, but you do it twice a day, every single day.
But I feel like we totally treat spirituality like that 2-hour marathon session.
Huh?
We book an expensive weekend retreat, we go to an intensive workshop, we do a massive binge of practice, and then we do absolutely nothing for 3 weeks.
And the sources clearly state that is the wrong approach entirely. It just leads to a frustrating cycle of binge and purge. The microdose approach is proven to be far more effective.
Microdosing spirituality.
Yes, because neuroplasticity, physically rewiring the structure of the brain, requires frequent repetition, not just occasional intensity. Small, brief moments of practice repeated very often are what actually change the structure of the brain.
So what does a spiritual microdose actually look like in practice? Give me a concrete everyday example.
It looks like mindfulness in motion. The data talks heavily about turning mundane chores into sacred rituals. Washing the dishes, for example, can be a deep spiritual practice if you're doing it with total, absolute presence.
Washing dishes, really. That is my least favorite chore.
Really. Try to actively feel the warmth of the water on your hands, truly smell the scent of the soap, feel the physical weight of the plate you are holding, listen to the specific sound the water makes. If you are fully, deeply immersed in that immediate sensory experience, your brain isn't ruminating on your worries.
Instead of just rushing blindly through it to get to the next thing on the list.
Right. There's an old Zen proverb that says, when you chop wood, just chop wood. When you carry water, just carry water. Don't chop wood while actively stressing about the water you have to carry later.
And don't wash the dishes while mentally drafting the angry email you need to send tomorrow.
Exactly. It is about not treating the present moment as merely a frustrating stepping stone to some better future moment. We are almost always living 5 minutes ahead of ourselves.
We're constantly anticipating the next thing.
Walking to your car, eating your lunch, folding a basket of laundry, these are all golden opportunities to practice presence. If you can be fully, intensely present while just folding your laundry, you are actively meditating. You are reclaiming that block of time from the anxiety loop.
Another practical tip that came up was setting intentions. Now, this is fundamentally different from setting a goal right.
Yes, very different. A goal is highly outcome-oriented. I want to finish this quarterly report. I want to lose 10 pounds this month. An intention, however, is value-oriented. Today I will be patient. Today I will practice kindness. Today I will act courageously.
So you start the day by priming your prefrontal cortex with a core value.
It is giving your brain an overarching theme for the day, and doing that fundamentally changes how you react to inevitable interruptions.
How so?
Well, if your primary goal for the day is pure efficiency, any interruption is instantly perceived as a failure. It triggers anger and frustration. But if your stated intention for the day is patience, that exact same interruption is no longer a failure. It is suddenly an opportunity to practice your intention.
Wow, that is a total game changer. It completely reframes the daily annoyance as the gym equipment. The really annoying colleague who always interrupts you is just the heavy weight you have to lift to get stronger at patience.
Precisely. You finally stop fighting against reality and you start working with it.
But let's go a little deeper here, because integration isn't just about making household chores more mindful or dealing with annoying coworkers. It is also about dealing with the truly hard stuff, actual suffering. You mentioned Frankel earlier.
This is where we touch on the deepest, most resilient side of the material, viewing major life challenges as curriculum.
Challenges as curriculum. I really like that phrasing. So when things go terribly wrong, it is not just bad luck or a cosmic punishment, it is the lesson plan.
Frankel's entire framework of logotherapy is based squarely on this idea. If you can look at a deeply painful situation, a bad breakup, a sudden job loss, a serious illness, and ask yourself, what is this actually teaching me? Or how can I possibly grow from this experience?
You change your relationship to the pain.
You transform the raw suffering into actual fuel. You move from being a helpless victim of random circumstance to being an active student of life.
Now, obviously, it doesn't make the suffering magically go away.
Yeah.
It still intensely hurts to lose your job.
It still hurts, absolutely. But it makes the hurt bearable. It gives the pain a context. As Nietzsche famously said, he who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow. Purpose is an incredibly powerful painkiller. If you truly believe your struggle is actively forging your character, you can endure it with profound dignity.
Okay, we are heading into the home stretch here. Segment 6, the pitfalls and the personal path.
Hmm.
Because we are obviously talking about a lot of very different, distinct traditions here today. Buddhism, Stoicism, Western psychology. And mixing all that together can get pretty messy.
It definitely can. The modern approach to this is very often eclectic. We like to mix some Zen mindfulness with a bit of Christian mysticism, add a little bit of nature worship, and maybe sprinkle some Stoic resilience on top.
It is the ultimate buffet approach. I will take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. A side order of mindfulness with a main course of forest bathing.
Which is generally fine, and the sources broadly support finding whatever specifically resonates with you, but there is a very clear warning in the research. One of the analyses specifically brings up the cultural respect rule.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because it is really easy to just grab cool-sounding aesthetic things and completely ignore the deep traditions they actually came from.
Exactly. We have to be very careful of what is called spiritual materialism. That is when we start collecting spiritual practices and trendy jargon like fashion accessories just to make our ego feel more special or advanced.
Like wearing a graphic tee of a band you've never actually listened to.
The core advice is to always honor the origins. If you are heavily using a practice from a specific ancient tradition, take the actual time to deeply learn about its historical context. Don't just treat it as a quick, trendy life hack. Truly understand the lineage you are borrowing from,
And the other major pitfall the sources mentioned was dogmatism.
right? The absolute need to stay open-minded. The best spiritual practice in the world is quite simply the one that actually works for you personally. If sitting meditation makes you feel significantly more anxious, which actually happens frequently for some people with trauma backgrounds, don't force yourself to do it just because it is at the top of the list. If quiet nature walks don't do it for you, try active moving meditation or try listening to complex music.
That perfectly leads into the final big idea here, the experiment.
This is genuinely the healthiest, most productive way to approach all of this. Treat your spirituality like a rigorous science experiment. Don't just believe in it blindly because a book told you to. Actively test it.
Be the lead scientist of your own daily experience.
Pick one practice, say gratitude journaling, and try it consistently for 2 solid weeks. Then step back and gather the data. Do you actually feel better? Are you sleeping more soundly? Do you snap at your kids less often? If the answer is yes, keep it in the toolkit. If the answer is no, aggressively discard it and try something else. Trust your own lived experience far over any textbook.
I really love that approach. It takes all the heavy pressure off. You aren't trying to be perfectly holy. You aren't trying to become a flawless saint. You are just practically trying to optimize your own internal operating system.
And remember, your specific needs will constantly change over time. What works perfectly for you at 25 might not work at all when you are 45. The path is always evolving. You just have to keep running new experiments.
So let's finally wrap this up. We have covered a massive amount of ground today, from the hard neuroscience of the amygdala all the way to the deep philosophy of the concentration camp. If we had to boil all of this down to a basic starter pack for the listener who is ready to just try this tomorrow morning, what does that actually look like?
Based on the complete synthesis of all the data we reviewed, the starter pack is incredibly simple. You don't need to buy a single thing. Number 1, 5 minutes of basic breath awareness. Just sit, notice when you get distracted, and return to the breath. That is your daily mental gym.
Perfect.
Number 2, a daily gratitude list. Just 3 specific things. Actively hack your RAS to start seeing the good in your environment. And number 3, a short intentional walk outside, ideally without any headphones on. Just let the natural fractals do their quiet restorative work on your brain.
5 minutes of breathing, 3 things to be grateful for, and 1 mindful walk. That is totally doable. That is highly achievable, even if you aren't a dedicated monk, even if you are an incredibly busy parent or a highly stressed, overworked student.
It really is. And you have to always remember the ultimate so what of all this material. The true end goal isn't to magically become a levitating guru. It isn't to detach from the messy world and go live quietly in a cave. The goal is to become fully, deeply human, to be vastly more connected to the present moment, to your own true self, and to the actual people around you.
That is it right there. It is simply about finally showing up for your own life.
It is about waking up to the actual life you are already living.
So here is our final provocation for you listening right now. It comes straight from the deeper implications of all this research. We want you to try something very specific today. The very next time you have a completely mundane interaction, sending a quick text message, talking to a cashier at the grocery store, or just sitting in your daily commute, try to treat it as a sacred ritual.
Just for that one moment.
Be completely fully present for it. Look the cashier directly in the eye. Actually feel the texture of the steering wheel in your hand. Just try it and see if the baseline quality of your day changes.
That right there is the real practice.
Something to think about. Thanks so much for diving in with us today.
See you next time.